Hi, I'm Kat Quatermass, and this is a summary of a workshop that I was running for CAST and Sport England as part of the Innovation and Digital Accelerator. This summary talks about what is user research, what do we mean by it in this project, why do we use it, when do we use it, and how can you plan and put user research together. Welcome to my hard-working elephant. I'm a fan of metaphors. This elephant is here as a metaphor. First, you've heard of white elephants. Those things that are beautiful, expensive, but nobody's quite sure what they're for. And maybe you've heard of the elephant in the room, the great big problem that nobody quite likes to talk about. Now, the sad truth of digital development is that its history is littered with white elephants and elephants in the room. You might even be aware of some in your own organisations. Across the charity sector, we commonly run into them with CRMs, customer relationship management projects, that have been bought at great expense and then nobody can quite use, but they turn up in all sorts of different places. So the main purpose of doing user research is to try and make sure that your digital project doesn't turn into either of those kinds of elephants. Now, before we leave him behind, my elephant's got another job to do. There's an old fable that turns up in lots of cultures where a group of people, 4 of them usually, are blindfolded and they're taken to an elephant, and each of them is taken to a different part of the elephant. And then they're brought back together to try and describe the elephant to each other and understand what it was that they'd seen. And they get into a massive argument because the one who has been at the tail has found it bushy and strange, and the one who has been at the trunk has described it as a leathery snake that interacts and huffs on his skin. One at the leg describes it as a tree trunk he could just about wrap his arms around, whereas one who was at the flank of the elephant describes it as an immovable wall. So my point is not that we should always be arguing about things. My point is that user research is one angle. It's one window, one way of looking at the elephant. And you need to use it alongside all your other techniques to understanding what people need. You need to use your analytics, your web analytics. If you're the type of NGB that does market research, don't suddenly cast that away. What you learn about the wider pool of demographics from big market research studies is still important. But try putting the techniques of user research into that mix and seeing how they all work together to help you to understand more about exactly what people need before you build something digital. Now, of course, you can actually use user research to design a service as well. And in many ways, those of you that have redesigned your activities for different settings, you've done that, whether it was focused, planned user research or not. What you were doing was taking on learning about what the people who wanted to play your sport needed and adapting so that they could play it in the ways that they wanted. And that's all that user research is trying to do. So what makes it different? Well, lots of things, but fundamentally this. When we do user research, we shift the focus of what we ask. We try not to talk to people too much about their future plans, and we try to ask them about their past or current behaviour, and we use that to work out what they need and what we can produce to meet those needs. Where possible, we try and observe their past and current behaviour, and where not possible, we ask questions. That is really the biggest shift. How do we do it? Actually, lots of different ways, although some of them are more common than others. I'm going to introduce you to 4 broad different ways user research can happen. So we start with interviews. One-on-one, online or face-to-face. They can be short. You could take someone away from the edge of the session and just do a 10-minute chat. Or they can be 45 minutes, in-depth and semi-formal. The purpose of the interview is to ask people about what they've experienced, to uncover the needs that you or your digital tool can meet. Now, needs might seem extreme for taking part in a sport, which is fun and it's not problem solving for us, it's an addition to our lives. But actually, to get to that sport or activity, it can be as significant as needs that people have to make it possible. But the same process that uncovers needs can also uncover wants and desires and be useful in that way. Interviews require you to get used to asking questions in a way that's supportive and helps build up trust, and sometimes that can be quite challenging. So often it's helpful to mix up that questioning phase with other things, and one of the things I really love to do particularly is activities. So again, they can be done online or face to face, and I've got 3 names listed there that are commonly used: a card sort, which is, as you can imagine, moving cards around; a tree jack. If you think of a menu on a website as a kind of tree with branches, a tree jack is a test that allows you to test whether people can find things in your menu; or a tone test, which is where you ask people what words they associate with a piece of writing or a video that they watch. All of these are things that if you do them very large scale, they can give you actual statistical results that can help what you shape would do next. So if you're the kind of NGB that does commission big research studies, you can consider whether any of these types of activity might be really useful on a large scale, particularly for something like planning a new website's menu structure. But they're also really, really useful on a small scale, where they can't give you any statistical truths, but very rapidly you start to see patterns of understanding emerging. And also because when you do them on a small scale, you do them observed. You don't send them off to people and get them to send them back. You watch them do them, and you ask them to talk loud while they're doing them. They will reveal a lot of different needs and opinions and wants of the people you're working with as they do the activity. And because my favourite's the card sort, I'm going to show you a couple. This is set up on a tool called Optimal Workshop. You can see on the left, this is an activity that I might be doing when I'm doing user research, maybe for a new marketing campaign. And I've got a list of things that some other research or just general knowledge of my teams have told me people think about my sports. And I'm going to ask the people I'm working with to sort it into columns. Does it put them off? Does it make me want to do the support? Is it something they don't think is true at all? Or is it something that they do think is true, but it just doesn't matter to them? And I ask them to talk as they sort. What are they saying? What's thinking? When they're saying it puts me off, tell me why. When they're saying makes me want to do the sport, what about is important? How does that fit into other things in their life? And I'm building up a rich picture. Well, they've got something to do that can be easier than talking. So you don't only have to use it for marketing activities, you can use it for all sorts of different things. You can use it to sort where things might go in menus, just like a tree jack actually. And it doesn't have to be digital. Here's a paper example I put together. So this one is more about exact words and content. I'm looking at phrases that might be going into a guide for someone to do things around planning new courts or nets or goals to take place in a sport. And I'm asking them to sort into how easy or difficult it is for them to do, so that I know when I'm writing the guide how much detail I need to go into, how many different signposts I need to offer. And I'm asking them about things that they don't know what it means, where I'm worried that my language might have alienated people or pushed them away from something that otherwise they would have liked to do. I'm just guessing at where someone might sort these, but you can see when you do a sort like this, you can put things in different ways. So I've got ascertain the owner and find out who owns it. And my guess is that people might sort those into different columns. The same with put up a net and install a net. They might sort those into different columns. And so that's how you use it, to see how people respond to phrases and to allow that to help you rewrite the document. Next thing I call observed use. In a formal sense, this is known as usability testing. Usability testing is when you take a prototype that could be made out of paper, it could be made digitally, or you take an alpha or a beta, that's like an early build of something you're working on digitally, you put it in front of them, you watch them use it, you set them tasks and see if they can complete those tasks or not. It's often described as a completely separate stage to user research, and when it's for the thing that you have built, it is a separate stage. But we really, really like to incorporate it in user research, to do it alongside the questions by taking things that already exist in the world and watching people use those. So, for example, if you're thinking about building an app that's got like virtual reality things going on, Maybe you're going to watch somebody ask people to show you how they play Pokemon. How many of those settings do they actually even switch on? Those kind of things. We spend a lot of time, because we do a lot of work on sites that are providing information about things. We watch people Google search, and then we watch them use the pages they find. And if any of you are in really early stages with your booking systems and don't have prototypes of your own to test, watching people search for an activity and seeing what they already find, and seeing which of those sites they're drawn to investigating more in, might be really helpful. And you don't have to do any of these separately. You can meld them together into making one session. Finally, you will hear lots of researchers speak quite negatively about focus groups. To be honest, no one I know who does user research is fond of focus groups, and that's for two reasons. It's not that they're bad, it's that they're difficult. When you've got a focus group, it can be incredibly hard to make sure that there isn't a loudest voice dominating. And it can be really difficult to make sure that generally minoritized voices step forward without making them feel uncomfortable. On the other hand, we know that sometimes group activities are the easiest things to pull together to do research in. So we do want things that can work in a group context. And so one of the things that we like to do with that is the old post-it note trick. Now, I know post-it notes have been around for feedback in sports development for years, because I used to sit in an arts development team alongside sports officers in the early 2000s, and we used to use them then. It's very, very similar to how you would use your post-it notes for planning just a feedback session at the end of a series of events. But there are some nuances. And particularly, we really like, for user research, to try and get people to make little mini maps. So we will ask them what happened when, and get them to put out the steps of what happened. And then after that, we will ask them to put the steps of how they felt. So you might start with a group of people who'd come to 4 new sessions that you'd run as a series, or that a coach had been running for you. And you might ask the coach to take them to a wall and give them post-it notes and map out what happened on the first day. Do you remember? And try and map out the steps. And then when you've got, I arrived, I came in, everybody else was getting changed, I didn't know where to go, somebody came and helped me, I had to fill in a form, all those different kinds of steps. Then once they've done the list of steps, you ask them to go back and you ask them to put in how they felt. And that'll be positives and negatives. You'll get moments where people are like, I feel good now, I feel like I know what I'm doing, or moments where people are really nervous, and those get mapped over the top. And that pathway gives you choices about how to redesign things to make more of the positive moments and reduce the negative ones. And obviously the example that I've just used is an example from the real world, an actual session entrance, but you do exactly the same thing with talking about the use of any app and any tool, particularly if you can't actually walk through it. One of the things that's really interesting to think about in terms of tools is, when do you use it? Where do you use it? It can tell you different things. So imagine somebody here, you've discovered that somebody is interested in using digital communities to learn about their sport. Ask them the last time they went to find that digital community. They might say, oh, it was when I was waiting to get on the bus. Immediately, you start thinking, oh, is that a noisy place? You can ask them, was it noisy? Were you able to hear? And suddenly you might learn that if you're going to use videos, they're going to need subtitles, because people are going to be listening to them in places where they can't hear voices, quite apart from needing them for accessibility anyway. So you can see how great sort of swathes of learning can come out from doing this kind of mapping. And that gives us our set of 4 activities. But there's so much scope there. Where do you start? Simple, calm statement. When planning your user research, tackle your riskiest assumptions first. What do I mean? I mean, look at the list of things you know about the people you're working with, that you already know and you're confident about. Look at the list of things you think you might know but you're not confident about. And look at the list of things that you think you don't know. Then look at each of those and think, how much of a difference does it make whether I know those or not? If I'm wrong about that, is it going to have a big consequence on my project? And some things will have, and some things won't have. The ones you want to research first are the ones that you feel like are going to have the biggest consequence on the project. Fairly straightforward. So, in order to plan user research, there's one more step that gives you a 3-step process. Let me shrink that face out the way a little bit. First, who do you need to research with? Which we haven't talked about that yet. Second, what we've just talked about, what are the key things that you want to know about these particular people who are going to use your digital product or new service. And 3, going right back to that set of 4 methods, which of those feel like they might tell you something useful? And if you choose an interview, what questions might you be going to ask? I want to say one thing about the who do you need to research with. At this point, you do need to be quite specific. You can be pragmatic, but you do need to be specific. So, for example, some sports have already been really specific and chosen a group to run come and try it sessions with, or to run some series of sessions, and that's great. That same group that you've targeted, for example, I think there's quite a few of you that have targeted Muslim or Southeast Asian girls of a certain age group, and that's a nice group that's narrowly focused and you can do user research with. When you plan that research, you might want to make sure that within that group, you think about like other demographic categories that could make people different. So within that group, you might want to make sure if you're interviewing, you are interviewing some people who do have disabilities and some people who don't. Or if you're trying to reach both rural and urban areas, you might need to make sure both are represented in the group. So it's narrow and then represent. Rather than some of the sports, I know your initial targets when you put the funding bids in were as broad as people from ethnically diverse backgrounds. You can't plan research across the whole of ethnically diverse backgrounds and expect it to be useful. What you do instead is you go, right, we're going to work with this group of people first because we've met someone from a community partner, we've got access to them. For whatever reason, you pick a group to work with first, do that set of research, make something that works for them, and then grow it to expand for others. And this is the point in the workshop session where we pause. Everybody spends 15 minutes working on their own thoughts of different groups of people they want to work with and what the things they're going to test and what they might try. And then we spend a good half hour, 45 minutes sharing those thoughts and swapping ideas about what might be possible, improving plans, building on plans. So you could do that. If there's someone sitting next to you watching this, you could pause and do that now. Or you could just bookmark this point. It's time-stamped in the descriptions anyway, and come back later and go, right, I'm going to do that activity now. And carry on with watching the rest. It's entirely up to you what your situation is. But really, genuinely, until you start trying this bit and looking at it and going, have I got it right? Will that work? Does that make sense? It's really hard to know what you're doing. So try it. It's experimenting. User research is all about testing, learning small things. Try again. Before you leave, though, just a few things that are the kind of things that are baseline, bottom line things that you probably already know that you need to bear in mind, but that we want to just make sure that we've told everyone. So, firstly, finding participants. It's what everybody's worried about, always, and it usually goes better than you think, but not as well as you hope. So you need to leave yourself enough time to find participants, and you need to plan for about a 20% dropout rate, even whether you're doing it online or face-to-face. I put choose a reward up front and center on this screen. It's only true if you're doing sessions that are like 45 minutes or longer. If you're catching 5 minutes with people at the edge of a sports session they've come to anyway, then don't worry about reward in that context. But otherwise, do think about rewarding people for their time. Do plan that into the budget. That could be cash, that could be vouchers. I've got a note in here that if you're working with your existing members, it could be NGB merchandise, but I wouldn't use that for trying to work with new people because who knows whether they want it. It's even more important if the research is aimed at increasing the diversity of people you work with. And that's because people who that come from minoritized backgrounds are increasingly asked to give their time for free to represent their background, and then that just isn't appropriate. So bear that in mind as you're planning. You can see the different types of people that can give you help recruiting. I expect most of you, because we're quite a long way into the project now, you've all made those community partnerships. You found your connections with the Muslim Sports Foundation, or you found your connections with the agencies in Birmingham and in Sandwell and across the West Midlands that can put you in touch with the right communities to talk to. The formal agencies, they can be the same agencies that do market research, or there are one or two that are more experienced in recruiting for user research itself. People for Research particularly does a lot of the recruitment for government projects. So those options are all there depending on your size and scale. And the other thing I mentioned is selling it as useful and fun. People often sell user research activities as useful. It will help us do this, it will help us do that. I think there's a tendency to forget to sell them as fun. It is an entertaining thing to do. It is maybe a little bit nerve-wracking to start with for people who are taking part, particularly if it's an interview, but genuinely they are getting to share things they know, things they believe in, discover things, play games, do activities with you. Most participants in user research activities report having found them fun. And then follow up. This is no different to any other kind of engagement you do. When you do a survey, you'll know that it's good practice to send up a kind of follow-up mail blast that goes, you told us this, we did that. User research is just the same. You want to find different ways to follow up with the people you've learnt from to make sure that they're included in the next steps. And there's some suggestions there. So, yes, especially when you're trying to work with a group that your organisation doesn't know, it can feel hard. But I think, remember, even for those of you sports that feel like you're terribly white, terribly middle-class sports, across the whole network of your clubs, there will be people from all sorts of different backgrounds. And it's just a question of asking those clubs to ask those people if they're prepared to help you. But equally, if that doesn't feel comfortable, you could go through an agency, and through an agency you can ask specifically for the background of people you'd like to recruit. There's lots of different ways around it, and it doesn't have to be as worrying as it sometimes seems, so long as you leave plenty of time. As you're planning, there are 3 big things that we remind ourselves to do. Make sure the research is inclusive and representative. That's partly what I was talking about before, is once you've got your target group, within that target group, have you checked you've got the different kinds of diversity represented? Have you invited people from different backgrounds within your target group? Is there anything in the way that you're running the sessions that is likely to exclude people? Now, sometimes that can mean that if you're including any observed activities, are they possible to do if you use assisted technology? Those kind of different things. Times of day that you run things can make a difference. You get the general idea. It's not different to planning other kinds of sessions. Sometimes, though, we're much better at making our final products accessible than we are our research, so that's why it's worth stressing. Getting consent. You've all been through the years of GDPR and getting organisations used to that, and so you know all about the need to get consent. One of the important things about when you're doing research is that informed consent. People must know what the research you're doing is for, as well as all the usual GDPR things of who you're going to share it with and how it's going to be stored. We've got a bullet point here that says at the end that it will be anonymous. That's only if it will, but very often what you're saying to people is for a certain period of time, a couple of weeks maybe, we might be storing your details associated with this research, but after that we're going to get rid of them, and you will just be quoted as a participant in or a person from place X. And if you're going to do that, they need to know that it's going to be anonymized, just as they would know if that you wanted to carry on using their name. And then safeguarding considerations. Again, working in sports bodies, you're going to have colleagues in participation and engagement teams that know all about safeguarding. It's just sometimes that we don't think that research needs safeguarding as much as the activity itself, and it does. So 1, make sure you've got different safeguarding things in place so that the participants in the research are safe. And then make sure that you've got things in place so you as researchers are safe. This gets particularly important if you're going to be doing any research looking at people's fears and barriers, because that's a journey that could open up traumatic pathways of storytelling of people telling you about what's happened to them. And you need all the procedures in place for that, so don't forget. But ending on that note of considerations, I don't want you to go away from this thinking that this is all difficult, this is all stressful. It's not. They're planning steps to take, and then there's no reason to panic, because all user research is interesting conversations, good notes from those conversations that help you understand what people actually need so that you can build digital solutions that will work for them. That's all I have to say in this session. There's a follow-up video to watch if you think you're going to be doing interviews as any part of your user research activities. There's a second video that takes you through some examples of bad user research questions for interviews and how to improve them. But I've put that together as a separate recording, so the link will be in the description. Thanks very much, and hope your projects all go very well.